All Things Data podcast. In the spirit of Daniel Kahneman, Peter Diamandis, and Google Moonshots, brings together leading data scientists, technologists, business model experts, and futurists to discuss how to utilize, harness, and deploy data science and data-driven strategies to enable digital transformation. The hosts are Dr. Manjeet Rege, Associate Professor of Data Science, and Dan Yarmala, Director of Business Development of IoT and Data Science.
You're listening to the All Things Data podcast, where we talk about data science, machine learning, artificial intelligence. My name is Manjeet Rege, and I'm joined by my co-host, Dan Yarmala. Hi, Dan.
Hi, Manjeet. How are you today?
I'm doing well. Who do we have as our guest today?
A great individual that I have come in contact with named Scott Branum, who is the Senior Manager of the Digital Business Solutions of Evoqua. Hi, Scott.
Hi, how are you guys doing?
We're doing well. Thanks for joining us.
This is very, very exciting. I've listened to quite a few of your podcasts online. I love the topic. I love the guest. So
let's get into it. Maybe you could tell us a little bit about you and your background and a little bit about Evoqua itself.
Sure. Evoqua is a very interesting company. They've got a long history, over 100 years in the water treatment business. They're more or less a conglomerate of a lot of acquisitions over the last 100 years. A name that people are very familiar with in the water industry is U.S. Filter, and it was formed by a gentleman named Dick Heckman. And what he did very entrepreneurially is he started to aggregate and buy up a lot of different technologies within the water space. And we have grown to be divested from Siemens recently, to being acquired by a private equity company, to now being a fully public company as Evoqua Water Technologies. But we have a long history and a long legacy in the water industry, which is very exciting to be a part of. Myself, I've been a part of the water industry for 25 years now. Was fortunate enough to get into water almost right out of college and have bounced around in various parts of it, for everything from the chemical application to the mechanical application to actually manufacturing chemicals for the water industry as well. So I've done a little bit of everything in this space. Here at Evoqua, I came on as a branch manager for them down here in the Southeast in Alabama. From there, I developed the digital platforms that Evoqua currently uses and have helped establish the digital strategy for Evoqua as we look to transform this company to be much more digitally enabled around our products, services, and solutions.
And Scott, when you talk about that digital or data-driven organization, can you tell me what was that journey? Where did you start? What was your vision of that? What was the impetus for that?
As a branch manager, within the light industry, we're a service-heavy customer. We have thousands of customers at a branch level. So you have a lot of moving parts. You have a lot of things that you have to take place. You've got a lot of unique customer needs. And amazingly enough, we didn't have a lot of insight into what was happening at the customer site. We would sell a piece of equipment, and we would lose all visibility of it. And for our service customers, they were more time-based instead of a value-based proposition. So as we would develop service plans for the day, for the week, for the month, whatever it might be, there was a high probability that a customer would call in with a need that we were unable to predict, and that we didn't know of. And we would, in order to meet that customer's immediate need, we'd have to shift around our plan. So our operational efficiencies were struggling. Our trade margin were very profitable, but it wasn't where it could be. So as I looked at this, the only thing I could see that would get us out of this, this paradigm that we had created for ourselves, was data. And so we had our largest product line, which is our service deionization product line. It was a traditional, been around for about 40 years, had no intelligence associated with it at all. And I said, how would we digitally enable service? One of the unique things that it did, and this was where some of the light bulbs really went off for me, digital breaks that paradigm of value and cost. You can add way more value at a disproportionately lower cost. And typically when we think of value, we think if we're adding more value, we have to add more cost. And also Evoqua, their entire business model was built around generating a cost, i.e. rolling a truck, sending a technician to go do something, in order to generate an invoice that then the customer would pay. So we were able to, by digitally enabling service deionization, not only were we able to get insights into what was happening with that piece of equipment, when it needed to be serviced way in advance of when it actually, the service would be performed. It allowed us to improve our service efficiencies, but at the same time, we've now transitioned to a model where we can generate revenue and not have it to, roll a truck and service the system. The customer actually pays for the water that they use, and we only provide service when it's needed, as we determine.
Scott, I think for context here for some of the listeners, it would probably be good to break down this components of your services, because you're saying, water usage, water by the gallon, kind of like power by the hour and GE engines, but kind of explain it for people that are not so water centric.
When you get into the water industry, the first thing you realize is how much water is used for everything that we buy, we purchase, or we use. Not only is it something that we take a shower with or we pull out of the faucet to brush our teeth, but it is literally used to make everything. So what Evoqua does is we actually take the water, it could be from a lake, it could be from a stream, or it could be directly from a city municipality, and we purify that water down to a level that the customer needs to do what they want to do with the water, whether it's mix something, bake something, clean something, whatever it might be. So the vast majority of what Evoqua does is we clean up water for use, whether for use or for discharge.
A great example is when we were in factories and you're providing steam and water for the boilers. And what is a cleaning process for a boiler? For the layman, we wouldn't even think that would need to be cleaned if it had some basics around it. So just for us, our understanding.
Well, when you take your shower and you see, look up at your shower head, and I know here in Alabama we have something that people are familiar with, hard water. You see that white foamy scale. Have you ever seen that before?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah.
So typically you would see that in your shower because you've got hot water, you got a little steam going. And what's left behind when you evaporate water is all the minerals and things that are left in the water. And that white calcium, that white hard layer that forms on your shower head is the same thing that would happen inside of a boiler if we didn't remove the hardness before the water went into the boiler. So softening or hardness removal is something it's a very typical application for a boiler feed at a minimum. And what it does is the water's heated up and it generates steams. It prevents that scale from depositing on the tubes, because if you have a layer of scale, you reduce your heat transfer. You have to put more heat in to get the same amount of steam. So, a softening application like you would have in your basement if you have hard water is very typical to what we would do for a boiler.
Yep, and these are massive scale, utilities, etc. Power, downtime, productivity is all essential. So water and this power generation through the boilers is just a fundamental part of the process that needs to be managed. And what I learned through Scott is okay, these utilities or refineries, they do great things, but they don't do water well, and that's where Evoqua really picks up that part of the chain in the value chain in production, if I'm saying that correctly, right? So.
Yeah, no, you're absolutely right. It's not core to their business. I mean, it's core to their business because they have to have it, but it's not core to how they make money. So you have customers that, in the traditional model, they want to buy, they want to own, to operate. And so we provide those products to them to do what they need to do with water. But then we also have a lot of customers in the model that's being data and digitally enabled is what we call our Water One service, which is we own the equipment, we provide the solution, and then we run it at an optimized level, and the customer just pays for the water that they use, much like you do in your own home utilities.
Mm-hmm. So, Scott, what is the single biggest barrier to implementing data-driven organization, in your opinion?
There's two things at its simplest level that make it very, very difficult. What got you here usually isn't going to get you to where you want to go. And so as a 100-year-old company, we've done a lot of good things over the years. And in changing that internal culture and the organizational structure that's needed to really support a digital service or a digital product is very difficult. But on the other side of the coin, you also have to change the culture of the customer. Because just because you have a digitally enabled product doesn't mean that the customer or the market is willing to accept this change in paradigm as well. So the biggest barriers or the hardest things that we work against constantly is both changing the internal culture and changing the external culture as well. Changing two cultures and hoping they kind of merge at the same time is very, very difficult.
Often I look at companies in Twin Cities here, some of the largest companies that have been around for many, many years, they find it difficult to adapt to the recent trends. As far as if you look at, on the other hand, if you look at any of the startups, they don't have that same old culture, and they're able to be much quicker on their feet and able to change that. I mean, do you agree with that?
I do, but it's kind of interesting because I've been actually working on some strategy information and some white papers for our company as well, because we're really trying to understand the comprehensive strategy a little bit better. In one of the industry, water is a critical resource, right? It's not even just from a scarcity point of view, but just how it's seen from a public point of view. It's something that it's almost a right to have clean water in the United States. So when you look at that, part of the question that I've been kind of struggling with, and I think Evoqua could be uniquely positioned, is the water industry going to trust a company that's been around for a couple years to digitally transform them? Or are they going to look to a company that's been here for 100 years to digitally transform them? Part of where the water industry is struggling is the fact that there's all this newness, and to a group that's not usually willing to change very quickly anyway, no matter what, the idea of investing in something that's only been around for a few years or a company that's only been around for a few years, I think is a very large barrier as I've kind of thought about it. But that being said, to your point exactly, smaller companies have a tendency to adopt, whereas larger companies, they struggle. A couple of companies I was just doing some reading on, Palm Pilots, Nokia, Xerox, Kodak, Blockbuster, MySpace. These were all companies that couldn't adapt.
Exactly. Right.
And they couldn't evolve.
Right.
And it's funny with Evoqua, and one of the things I've been challenging them with is I said, your 100-year legacy could be your greatest strength, or it could be the result of your downfall. You're kind of at this precipice. Yeah, they're kind of at this precipice of, are we going to take this legacy and leverage it, or are we going to let it be an anchor and drag us to the bottom of the ocean? Because if Kodak can fail, I'm pretty sure Evoqua could fail too.
Right, absolutely. In terms of data, how much data are you using on a daily basis?
I think the last time we looked at this, we were generating about 20 million rows of data a day. I couldn't tell you exactly how much. It's in gigabytes. It's in gigabytes per day. I can't remember.
Okay.
The number may have been 2 or 3 last time I checked. It's a fairly significant amount of data. Do we generate?
And
now,
do
we generate? Let me differentiate between generate and use.
Right. And in terms of extracting value from it, do you have like a team internally? Do you outsource that?
You know what? We use a smaller percentage of data than we should. It's a fairly low percentage, but here's where it gets exciting. Is we've stepped back, and for, say, we were talking about our service deionization business, we're stepping back, and instead of saying, we have this data coming in, let's figure out something to do with it, we're now going back and saying, if we're going to generate data, before we even generate it, what's the value? Who's going to use it? And how are we going to use it to capture value? And I think that's where the industry falls down a little bit, as they say, well, let's just get some data and we'll figure out some value from it down the road. We're coming back to our efforts and saying, no, what is the data that's critical? Why is it valuable? And who's going to use it? What form are they going to use it in? And how are we going to capture the value? So we actually start with the business case and then work back to the technology and the data.
Mm-hmm. And in the field of data science, there are different aspects. There is big data visualization, there is big data management, machine learning, AI. What aspects of these have you applied to your use cases?
So we definitely have a visualization component because people are to consume data. But when we look at visualizations, in our opinion, the days of looking at a dashboard are over. I'm not going to visually transform something and expect for you to log in to look at a process that's running really well. Doesn't make any sense. So the UIs that we generate are exception-based UIs, so that when a person views their particular dashboard or their particular information, it only identifies the things that need to be worked on or need to get done. What we do is in order to accomplish that, we build intelligence in two places. We put a lot of intelligence, a lot of business logic at the edge. And then we also do cloud-based machine learning and AI. So this goes back to the beginning, when we say, okay, we want to digitally enable this service or this product. We come back and we say, okay, what data are we going to collect? Why is it important? How are we going to transform it? What business rules do we want to put in place? And then when it notices something, who's going to do what? So, I'm pretty excited about some of the things that we've launched because it's taken something that's fairly complex and that you have traditionally required somebody to look at a graph and be able to interpret something to now we're saying, nope, not only does it tell you where your issue is, but it tells you here's what you need to go do to correct it.
Scott, can you talk a little bit about the underlying technologies that you are using? Because in my courses here, we use SAS, we use AWS, we're using Google Cloud, we use Python. For all of these different use cases, what is the underlying technology that you are using?
So recently, we had a platform called Link to Site, third-party contracted we built about 10 years ago. I believe it was a cold fusion application, I think was the underlying technology. That was sunset last year. And so over the last couple of years, we did a lift and shift and redeveloped that platform in Microsoft Azure. And then Evoqua has made a decision to be a Microsoft-centric business. So they're a strategic partner of ours. So our visualizations have been based in Power BI and Power BI Premium, Power BI, Embedded BI within our Link to Site portal platform. We are looking at other third-party applications now that we have a Azure-based suite of applications. There are some capabilities that we're interested in around machine learning and AI that we're currently partnering with some third parties to evaluate, their capabilities. But we're also saying, is this core to who we want to be in the future, and should we have this capability in-house? Maybe a development effort will be in the future. So that's where our platforms are today.
Scott, a lot of the IoT literature out there is this concept of the elusive ROI or pilot purgatory. And I know that Evoqua's footprint and size and scalability is different than most, and we can go down that path a little bit. But what would you advise others, or what are the caveats? What are the things that you have seen like that, that you could give some kind of guiding light to as to getting out of pilot purgatory? I know you mentioned business case backward, but, when you read this stuff, what do you think?
Well, a couple things is eventually you have to make a decision. You got to pick a partner, you got to pick a platform, and you've got to go. And part of this analysis paralysis or paralysis by analysis is not just unique to IoT, it's unique to a lot of businesses. But the thing I've learned most importantly is that the piloting phase is probably more of a reflection that the right internal organizational structure doesn't exist, that the company itself has not realized the need to digitally transform. That can look like a lot of different things. So this is not a bottom-up type transformation. This is literally it has to be a top-down driven initiative. And where things get stuck with the pilot is that the upper management is still focused on the day-to-day, meeting quarterly expectations, and that companies are not segmenting off a group or or a department to say your whole focus is on how this company will digitally transform, what that's going to mean, and how we're going to get there. They look at digital IoT as a bolt-on. It's just going to make what we do today a little bit better. And so I think the ones that are really struggling have got to step back. The first thing they have to ask themselves is, do I have a comprehensive strategy? And if I don't, then I'm probably never going to get out of this pilot purgatory. Just not.
And, we've had a few discussions where you had a pretty extensive analysis or what you consider digital maturity workshops for your internal teams. And can you talk about that? Because it's been a fantastic analysis of how to evangelize, how to institutionalize these things, like what's ready, how do you get it off the dime, and it would be interesting for you to share that.
Absolutely. So as I've gone through, as we've started down our digital journey, we've worked with third parties. I got to see a lot of people and a lot of companies and their interpretation or their ideas on, how you take some ideas and concepts and bubble it to an actual business plan. A lot of tools, a lot of methodology. There's plenty of publications and reading to be had, but I took what I liked and what made sense to me and kind of developed it into what we consider our digital transformation workshop. And interestingly, where we always start is with our current financials. And we look at, the last 3 years. We look at things like revenue, service cost, our EBITDA, trade margins, business level or product level performance. And the reason we start there is most people don't have a good idea of what's going on financially within the company, especially on like a 3-year trend level. Are we getting better? Are we getting worse? Are we flat? What is really going on with the company? When you really put the financials out there, the first thing it does is, one, you get a bunch of, oh, I didn't realize that. And then the second one is it creates, a level of urgency within the workshop that, this is not the trend that we want or we thought we had. So we know that working harder isn't the solution. So we're willing to listen and really give this a go to come out and see if we can come up with something that we can agree on and move forward with. Does that make sense?
Yeah, it does. It
Absolutely.
makes sense. The thing that on my IoT journey that I found interesting in collaboration with Evoqua was that we're looking for this machine learning output that is the Holy Grail. And we want to get there, and we want to have this data lake, and we need great data scientists. We need great data. We need a lot of time with that. We need to wrangle with it. But it's a process, right? It's a continuum. And I've noticed, the people that are making inches, which turn into feet, which turns into 10 yards and a first down, is obsession on personas, workflow, and process, and trying to find those little slivers of inches that alleviate or automate some of your personas or your people in the field and saving them on a half a task or a quarter of a task. I mean, in micro tasks, microservices almost. I mean, and that, maybe you can talk about that for a second, Scott, because that's where I think the game is at. I don't think it's so high level. I think it's right in the trenches.
You're absolutely right. And because a lot of times they'll come up with a tactical plan, but they haven't really thought about, the strategic or, even down to the personal level of when you talk about transformation, you're going to impact somebody. And they're usually, the processes I've seen, they're not very good at saying who at the individual level is going to feel this and how are they going to feel about it. But you're absolutely right. We spend a lot of time in our workshops after we work through the financial side to understand why we're doing this just from a business point of view. Is we spend a significant amount of time identifying all the people that are going to be impacted by this transformation. And then we ask the simple question of why? Why should this persona or why should this use case with this persona, why does it need to be digitally transformed? What's it going to do for them? Why is it going to be better? How is it going to impact their job? Is it going to impact it for good or for bad? But we also do this. We don't go in and blow everything up either. We spend time with that persona to say, what do they like about what we do today? Obviously, they like something. They're giving us money today to do this. What do they like about it? And if there's something that they like, is there a way to digitally enhance it to make it even better? But, it was interesting, Manjeet, that, you were talking about your class and how you said you didn't have to be a STEM student, right?
Right.
I think that's something else that people lose is because when they're hiring, say, a VP of, IT, or they're looking, they typically look into the STEM realm. There's a book I read called The Fuzzy and the Techie. I don't know if you've read it or not, by Scott Hartley.
I've heard of it.
But his whole premise is that technology is really going to be changed, or the people that are really going to change it are more the liberal arts bent. Because digital is becoming, there's a very technical aspect of it, but the usability of it is becoming much more layman.
Absolutely.
And liberal arts people have a tendency to make that bridge between technology and people, and understanding how people feel about digital transformation and how it impacts them, and that they think more in those terms than an engineer who just says, does this work or doesn't it work?
Right.
And I think Dan, you're right. This is where they're missing the boat, is people.
And also, when I look at the way a number of companies hire, instead of growing their internal team, like, for example, the work that you're doing with the workshops, it helps create an awareness about the work going on. And the people within the company who have large amounts of domain knowledge within themselves, there's a huge amount of experience. If you train them, they are much able to adapt to the change, as opposed to hiring the newest and the freshest data scientist out there who might know the skill, but he does not know how to apply to the domain knowledge.
Absolutely. And it's interesting because when you're doing something for a long time, or you're just, you have a bent towards being technically astute, it's amazing how we think we're in touch with the customer or the end user. And when we actually engage them, we realize, you know what, we've lost a little bit of touch, or we're not as engaged as we thought we were. For example, there was a line of business that wanted to do a workshop. And before the workshop, they came in and they said, look, here's 5 things that the market is not ready for. So we understand we've got to go through this workshop. We understand that it's a kind of a corporate requirement, but we're going to go ahead and tell you there's 5 things that the market just will not transform with today. And I said, okay, give them to me. And I actually said, do you mind if I go out and talk to a couple of your customers? I just want to validate these. And they're like, no, here's a list of 3 or 4 customers. And so I actually went, sat down with the customers, talked to them. And we come to find out that not only were they wrong on all 5, but the customer said, if you had this available, I would buy it for you today.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. And then we actually found one customer that was buying what we were thinking about doing from our competitor for a very large sum of money. And he was very happy about the amount he was spending. He thought he was getting a great deal. And we're like, we can't believe you're paying that much. So part of the barrier with IoT is that we think we know customers. We've got to get a lot more cross-functional in the skill sets we hire to reconnect with our customers in a way that we haven't done before to really enable this IoT transformation.
So I think that's a good segue to my next question. Scott, what do you feel is missing from the overall debate in general, and what would you like to emphasize?
That's a great question. I think the thing that is, and I struggle with this, is that within business is very, and rightfully so, is very transactional, in that if I spend $1, I need to make 2, right? I think the companies that are going to succeed in this are going to say, you know what, I'm going to invest because I have a plan. I'm not quite sure exactly what the return is, but I know if I'm not at a certain point, or I don't have certain capabilities by a certain point of time, then the probability of me catching up are pretty slim. So I think the thing that's missing is there's some balance between, there are just some unknowns that we're just going to have to dive into the pool with. And we can't, if we wait till we have this whole thing figured out and we can implement this thing with almost zero risk, I think at that point where it's going to be too late for any company. So, how does a company look at these opportunities and start, building for the future without having the full return figured out from the very beginning? Does that make sense?
Absolutely. So, Scott, this was really helpful, and we really enjoyed chatting with you, and I'm sure our listeners would have enjoyed too. Thank you so much for your time.
Absolutely. It's been a pleasure. I get real excited about this, and you guys have made my day just by giving me a chance to sit down and talk with y'all. I really appreciate it.